Hello and welcome to this module of consumer behavior. I'm Dr. Greer and I'm really excited today to talk to you about demographics and social stratification. And I think that this is one of those little tools that a marketer can put into their tool chest and realize that we have a lot of different marketing abilities that we can use when we understand and utilize social stratification and demographics in marketing. What we're going to be talking about is going to be this same framework. And so we're going to start from this external influences. We're still in that section. And as I said last week, we're going to be going from more of a macro level down into more and more of a micro level. So this week we're going to be focusing on demographics and social stratification. As you can see in that external influences area, we're just kind of coming down this. We're getting closer and closer to where an individual might be. And there's some really interesting aspects to this. So before we dig into this, I just want to say there are so many amazing pieces of information that we can use as marketers to effectively communicate with the people that we are talking to. Now, I've said this before and I'm going to say it a million times in this class. The whole purpose of what we're trying to do is to satisfy a need of someone. And I just thought in my normal class inside an actual interactive class, each week we talk about purchases. And we start off the class with who made a purchase this week. So I just wanted to maybe share that example with you right now. This week, I finally decided that I was going to mount my 75-inch TV to the wall. And I'm kind of a snob about that stuff. I used to have a company that did that for a living, and so I'm kind of hoity-toity about it. And I don't want to just have a TV mounted. I want to have a TV mounted with the cables inside the wall, so it looks like the TV is floating above the entertainment center. And so I randomly just was at Costco. They had a really nice mount for $60 off, and I was like, okay, this is it. I'm going to do it. And I knew if my wife asked me why I got that, I could tell her that I got a discount. But I got that just because, I don't know, no one else sees it, but I want to see it, and it's what I like to do. The other thing I bought, just randomly, was I needed an extension cord to go up through the wall because the TV cable's now not long enough to reach. So I spontaneously got on Amazon, ordered that cable, and then I needed an HDMI cable that was long enough. I know you're probably not a cabling nerd, but I am. And so I'm very particular about what kind of HDMI cable I have and that it's a top of the line spec and not just a basic one. And so I got on Amazon and ordered 3 of those so I could have the Xbox One, the Apple TV, and the Switch all connected, because I hate it when we have to unplug something and plug something in. And now that I'm thinking about it, I'm probably going to have to get back on because I'm waiting for those to come tomorrow. And get one more because we always have a 4th thing that we want to plug in. And it's my son's Wii U, I think is what it is. And anyway, so these are all the things that go through my head. But I made those purchases. And if you were to ask me, did I make a good purchase? I'd say yeah. And if you would ask me, was it a good deal? Well, yeah, I saved some money. I got a good deal on the HDMI cables on Amazon. And I mean, as I think about it, I would justify that, the sale price for the HDMI cables was pretty good. And in fact, instead of buying the gold-plated HDMI 2.2 spec, $32 each cables, I got a pretty decent deal for 3 for $21.99 on Amazon. They were 15 footers. I mean, I think that was a good deal, and I'm happy with that purchase. And there were different colors, which means I can know, the blue one's plugged into the Apple TV, the green one's plugged into the Xbox. I can do something like that. So why am I telling you this? The reason I'm telling you this is because I believe that it's very important that we as marketers do not get out of the mindset of analyzing ourselves. We are a great research tool to understand the psyche of a buyer. Now, when I say that, I don't mean that as in everything. We can't make a generalization on it, but we can get in and start being honest with ourselves and thinking, okay, what was it about this that made me want it or purchase it? And I mean, this is funny because I would give you the advice to maybe use that to not purchase as much, but more often than not, I would say if you're going to make the purchase, just realize why. and try to be honest with yourself about why, because a lot of people cannot be honest with themselves about why. But the more honest you become with yourself, the better a marketer you will be, because you'll start seeing triggers that fire off in other people. So just a really brief war story incident. I'm the director of marketing here at doTERRA. And one of the things that I see all the time is when we write an email, people are like, oh, I want to put this huge paragraph of text in an email. And it's actually pretty funny to me, because I always ask the question to the person wanting the email, would you read this email? And they answer, oh, no, I wouldn't, but that's not who we're talking to. I'm like, oh, hold on, time out. Why wouldn't you? Well, it's too long, and they'll tell you all the reasons. And I think sometimes we trick ourselves and we think, oh, I'm smarter than the average consumer. When in reality, we are the average consumer. So if we're not going to do something, someone else is not going to do it either. So that's just a quick little, I guess, marketing hack, life tip that I wanted to give everybody today, give you. And just let you know that I don't think it's good for us to ignore ourselves, because we can learn a ton from ourselves. So having said that, I want to jump right into this social stratification concept. We're going to be going over the role that demographics play in influencing consumer behavior. We're going to talk about the different generations that have existed in America, because remember, last week we were talking about American values, and now we're going to talk about generations in America. And because we're pulling it back in, and then social stratification, like socioeconomic, where do we fit in the classes, I would say, of America. And then we're going to talk about how that's measured. How is a social class measured? And I'm going to give you some tools to help measure class at that point that are in the book. And then we're going to talk about how do you use this when you're developing a marketing strategy. And that's pretty much what we're going to go through. So this should be a fun one. So let's just jump right into demographics and social stratification. So demographics are those basic fundamental pieces of information that we grab from people. And one of the fascinating things to me is, at this point, you might not know this, but when you work for a large company, we can know pretty much everything about a person when they visit our website. There are so many tracking tools. You can know maybe not all of this, but if you type it into Facebook, you can. And there's a lot of stuff that people give to us, but we can know, like, okay, what's the group of people? How big is it? What is their occupation? What are they doing? I mean, I just updated my profile on LinkedIn, and I have received at work probably 50 in the last week emails about a promotion. Oh, congratulations on your promotion. I'm like, who's hearing all this stuff? Like, I didn't tell anybody this, and I realized I updated my LinkedIn profile. I'm like, dang it, I hate doing that, because it gives people information to market to me. But I've been getting a lot of marketing emails based around even what I'm doing, and they're scraping through LinkedIn to get that information. So just little fascinating pieces on that. The education level, income, and age. So these are just basic demographical things that we ask and get of people, and then we can kind of classify them in order to market properly to them. And I just want to put this in a real world context. So let's just say that, and in fact, I will tell you a story. There was a journalist who wanted to interview the CEO of a particular company. This happened last year. And as a quick little hot chocolate hit there, as a way to get into that person's sphere of influence, they called a million times, and this journalist called a million times, couldn't get through. So what they did was they got on Facebook, and they took out a Facebook ad. And the ad said, hey, I would like to interview this CEO for a topic that I have I'm writing. I think it was for a paper they were doing for their academic endeavors. They were trying to get a degree. Kind of went through it. Well, geographically isolated where that they wanted that ad to go. They talked about occupation, they talked about education, they talked about potential income level and age, and got it down to, so they were advertising to 2 people on Facebook. And so they ran this ad. I think it cost them about $68 to run this ad multiple times on Facebook or whatever. But got a phone call from the CEO saying, I was confused, because I thought, is this for me? And so we can get very specific. I actually got his interview and was able to do that. And I think that's what I want us to understand is the power of these things is we can isolate now with so much metadata that we have. We can isolate and target very specific groups with very specific messaging based on these things. Now, whether or not it's effective is up to us, but it doesn't mean, for the first time, I think in the history of man, we can talk to the exact people that we want to talk to as marketers. And there is a ton of power in that, and it just makes me excited. Now, I'll tell you, there's a lot of lazy marketers who just kind of still do the same things, and I'm not telling you I'm brilliant at it. I'm just saying that we can put enough effort into it so that we can talk to the exact people that we want to based on demographics. So the next little piece is looking at one of these, this table 4.1 on page 112. This talks about what's the likelihood that someone's occupation will influence them to purchase or use or consume one of these products. So if we go down here and we say, okay, domestic beer, wholesale or retail trade occupation, they're over likely, so 100 is average. So they're more than likely to drink beer, but professional, scientific, and technical people are going to drink more domestic beer, whereas mining and construction workers are going to drink even more beer. Now, you're like, but who doesn't drink beer? Well, we could get into some different different occupations and we could find that out. If you go down to seeing food and wine at the very bottom. So they're going to read a food and wine magazine. Wholesale and retail people are less than average likely to do that, whereas professional, scientific, and technical people are more likely because it's 139. And mining construction people, they're even lower. They don't read food and wine very often, probably unless it's at the dentist's office. I love the Costco one in the middle of shopping. It's like, okay, wholesale retail people, they're about on average. Mining and construction people, they don't really use Costco nearly as much. But man, those professional, scientific, and technical people, they love to go to that warehouse. They love to get their stuff. It's almost like they feel like they're blue collar workers when they're pulling down the big bulk items and putting it in their cart. And I think Costco is a fascinating experiment on what I would say I would not expect what's happening with their social stratification to be the case, but it is. It's pretty fun to watch. Anyway, really fun graph to look at. And then we can look at education influence. So based on what education level are they going to consume something on average? And so once again, 100 is the average. If someone did not graduate high school, they're less likely to travel foreign in the last 3 years. Like they're less likely to have gone on a trip outside of the United States. Whereas if they graduated college, they're 135, so they're more likely to have traveled. We would look at registered to vote. Notice that on registered to vote for activities, the less schooling you have, the less likely you are to have registered to vote. It's an interesting dynamic. So how does that play out on economics and political stages? That's a good question we could ask. If we were to target voters, do you think we would also target college graduates if that was our piece because they're more likely to be a voter? Those are the kinds of questions that we could ask ourselves. When we look at media that people read, if we go down to people and we see that if you do not graduate high school, you're very low likelihood that you're going to read People. Whereas if you graduated college, that's the highest group that read the People magazine. And I'm like, what? Like, to me, that makes no sense. Whereas we can see a direct inverse with Nick at Night if we were to watch Nickelodeon. Like, college graduates, way less likely to watch Nick at Night. Whereas if you didn't graduate high school, you're really likely to have done that. And once again, this is 2010, so these could have changed a little bit, but also Fox News. Like, Fox News is an interesting one at the very bottom there because it looks pretty much similar. I mean, if you didn't graduate, you probably didn't do it, but if you did graduate college, you're a little less than average likely to. So it's just interesting to see those different pieces there based on education. So hopefully this is showing you that based on a demographic, we can assume a certain type of consumption or behavior by a consumer. When we look at age, when we start jumping into this one specifically, there's some key growth categories, and we can see that there are basic age distributions, which is like what groups we have. in the United States of America, and this is for the US, excuse me. And so right in that little sweet spot, the 30 to 39-year-olds, they're kind of like the lowest group, but they'll be the highest group in 2020, which is right now. So there's going to be a percentage change. So we're going to have people move in. And you can see that everything kind of flows with it as it goes. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But we can start seeing 50 to 59 in 2010 to 50 to 60 and 69. So in that 10-year gap, it was 41,680. Now it's 38,000. Well, what's happening there? That's people dying. Okay, so that's what's happening is people are dying. But we can see that there's a big swing because before that was only 28%, but now we have a bigger group. That's like the baby boomers or something like that coming into that. So we're going to talk about the different stratifications for that. So let's just talk about age for one moment on consumption. If, and once again, 100 is the average. I just want us to keep that in mind here as we look at this. So skateboarding, which I love, 65 plus, you're way less likely to be skateboarding, only 15 out of the 100 to equal the average. Whereas if you're 18 to 24, it's almost a 300. So we have a 3x from the average amount of people that are skateboarding. If you go to 35 to 44, though, that's almost at the average. It looks like 45 is when you start breaking stuff and you really start worrying about it. But as someone who's 43 right now, I can tell you I haven't touched a skateboard in 20 years. Well, maybe 10 years. So I feel like I'm too frail and I don't have as much balance. So, but I used to skate all the time. So it's just interesting to look at these different things based on age. To get Botox, I thought it was fascinating to see that 25 to 44 is the group that gets Botox. Before that and after that, people just don't really care. But that's kind of, I guess you would say, the 20 years of vanity that people have in there. What's another big one? Okay, 25 to 34-year-olds are over double likely to go to Chuck E. Cheese's down there under shopping. Why? Why do we think that? Well, it might be because they have kids, so that's why they're going there. It's just an interesting, piece of what's happening based on age. So yeah, you can take a look at this. This is also in the book on page 115. Pretty good information. So let's kind of pivot and start talking about the generations. And this is something I'm sure you've heard a bunch about. If you're a millennial or Gen Zer or whatever, like there's a lot of stereotypes that happen. In fact, before we go into any of this, well, let me talk about the age cohorts. So a generation or age cohort is a group of persons who have experienced a common social, political, historical, and economic environment. So when we analyze these, or we do a cohort analysis, it's us trying to figure out and describe and explain the attitudes, values, and age of a group, as well as predicting future attitudes, values, and behaviors. I want to be very clear before we go on. I wrote it down over here on my whiteboard, but I think that understanding in marketing leads to empathy, which leads to being very effective as marketers. I think assuming leads to stereotypes is the way I like to say that. So understanding leads to empathy, assuming leads to stereotypes. And just personally, I believe that stereotypes can be dangerous and can lead us down some bad paths as a marketer. So it's really important that we actually get some empathy for these groups. And we can talk maybe at another time about how to do that. Well, I'll tell you just right now. I think that the way you do that is you do interviews. I'm a big qualitative person. That's why we have a bunch of those assignments in this class, to actually sit down and ask people questions. I find it fascinating when marketers are nervous to do that because you're in trouble if that's you. You need to get over that. You need to start talking to people. So I subscribe to the concept of interviews to develop theory. I never assume a theory. What I like to do is ask 10, 15 people that are in the key demographic until I start seeing a pattern, do some interviews, get a pattern established, and then I put out a survey to verify. And so you can establish a pattern with small amounts of qualitative interview, and then you turn it over to quantitative and see, does that pattern actually stick based on questions that you sent out to the group as a whole, and get several thousand responses or something like that. So that's just another little marketing hack. Hopefully you wrote that down because that's worth your weight in gold just for this class right here. That'll make you a really good marketer versus everybody else. So when we look at this, we have the mature market and then the other market that's just below. So my parents are baby boomers. My grandparents were Depression people. And pre-Depression people are almost all dead at this point. But this mature market, this higher up group, they actually do have a lot more money. And it's typically because they've kind of taken care of themselves. They've had a career. They've done all that. So when you're targeting that, the gerontographics concept is that you identify these 4 segments of the mature market. So those 4 segments are the healthy indulgers, the ailing outgoers, the health hermits, and the frail recluses. And when we talk about that, we can say, okay, there is a group of people that want to be the older couple with a vet going on a Caribbean cruise, like finally living the life that they've waited to have, I guess would probably be the way I'd say it. Then we have the ailing outgoers. These are the ones that are frail and maybe are trying to be more healthy. They can't take care of themselves as much, but they're still able to get out there. They're just cautious. Then we have the health hermits. These are the ones that are all worried about a lot of things around them. There's a lot of fear, I would say, in this market. And so it's like, we need to make sure that they're taken care of. They want to make sure that they have security. I would say that some less than positive marketing that happens is don't lose all your money, buy gold today. Like those kinds of things are kind of probably aimed at these, these 2 or 3 of these groups here. And then we have the frail recluses. I would say these are the I've fallen and I can't get up group that people market to. They stay at home, they're really weak, and they're just trying to kind of survive. So once you have that frame, you can start looking around, seeing different ads on different networks, and you're like, oh, I see who that's at. And in fact, on TV, you can see what's the key demographic that this group probably thinks is watching. That's another way to look at that. All right, so let's look a little bit closer at the baby boom generation. This is my parents, and baby boomers. They're a lot of fun. They are still at this point probably one of the wealthier generations with a lot of people. So it's a market that a lot of people want. It's sometimes hard to crack into because their demographic kind of set their pattern in a way at some point. And I think that one of the issues that we have is at the bottom here. They're often alienated by overly youth-oriented appeals and ads, and yet I think there's a lot of people that want to appeal to that 18 to 25 demographic because they want to set those patterns early in life to be loyal to the brand. I can't remember if I talked about this last week, but there was an article in Adweek, though, how there are a lot of marketing and advertising execs that are pulling out of the 18 to 25-year-old bracket. They're not advertising to them anymore, and it's because they don't have money. They are spending all their money. They're not setting themselves up for life. And when they're spending all their money, it's not as much money as the baby boomer generation. So you have a bunch of people retiring with millions of dollars. They have a really high monthly income in the baby boomer generation. And they can go out and buy pretty much whatever they want. Whereas you have this younger generation who's working really hard. They're spending everything really quickly, but the amount of money that they have that they're spending is so much lower than the baby boomer generation. So I think that is one of the interesting things that's happening right now. And I think that baby boomers are defining retirement a little bit differently. I think a lot of them are helping out their kids. They're doing a lot of stuff that previous generations, I think, wouldn't have done, and it wasn't done for them. But yeah, they typically are a little more tech savvy. I know my mom has an iPad and an iPhone, an iMac, and a laptop, and she uses them all. And I remember when I first showed her, well, I tried to get her on an iPhone forever because I'm like, hey, this is like built for you. And she was using an older phone that was a slider phone that had typing, like just normal phone, like a keypad on it. It was an old LG or something like that. And when she finally transitioned over, she's never gone back because she was really quick to just absorb that and start running with it. Another funny little anecdote was one time she started texting to my whole family in this big group text, like what she was doing all day. And so after about the 5th text, I finally just called her up and said, hey, what are you doing? She's like, well, I just thought everybody wants to know what I'm doing. I'm like, hey, get a Twitter account. If you want to tell me what you're doing, that's that platform. Like, you can tweet whatever you want or put it on Facebook, but it's not a texting thing. And so as soon as I explained that to her, she's like, oh, okay, she pivoted away. But they're pretty tech savvy as soon as we educate them, I would say. So when we stereotype these people, we got to look beyond that. But I think a lot of times we think that all the boomers have the same values and outlook. They're all self-centered. They're not tech savvy. They're married empty nesters who are downsizing, and they're all retiring early and wealthy. That's not exactly true, but some of those things can be true. But once again, we need to understand our boomer that we're going after to get empathy, not assume. As someone who's in Gen X, and I'm at the very end of Gen X, beginning of Gen Y. I'm right at the cusp. I'm right in the middle of those two. I can't wait to be an empty nester. I mean, I love my children, but I'm young and my youngest son's almost 13. And so we're counting down, 6 years and he's out or he'll be in college or on a mission or something like that. So we're like, hey, this is exciting for us. We're pretty pumped about that because we feel like we are young and we've got a lot more income than we ever had before as it's happened. So moving on to my group. I'm the youngest version of a Gen Xer. So we're smaller than the previous generations. We're highly educated, of course, with a PhD. I feel like I qualified in here. With more college attendance and graduates than previous generations. And 20% of Gen X women earn more than their spouses. Now, I was a stay-at-home dad for 5 years. And that's a fun little thing right there because it's like, okay, well, how did that happen? Or what was that like in the Greer household? And I actually got a lot of grief from a lot of people. They didn't understand what our financial situation was, but I had a lot of people like, oh, what's going on? Is everything okay? And I'm like, yeah, we decided that my wife is going to go to work. And a lot of people are like, oh, okay, is everything all right? Because I had gone from owning a company to being a stay-at-home dad. And then when we decided to pivot back, I was a dean at a college. And so I actually enjoyed that time of my life, but it was very interesting to see my peers think that was crazy. And, I thought it was fine. So, in fact, it was probably the most fun I've ever had in my life. So, I think that when we look at Gen Xers being both cynical and sophisticated about products, ads, and shopping, I would agree. I see an ad for what it is really quickly. Might be because I'm in marketing. But I think that my whole generation is worried about that. And this bottom one about being materialistic and impatient. I'm mad that Amazon can't deliver right when I order. And so I'm like, come on, you guys have this down to day after delivery. Can't we just make it like you have a warehouse right by me? I order enough stuff from you. Can't I get that now? So I totally think that that's a correct assumption right there. All right, Generation Yers. So this is probably your group that you're in, and I am at the very top of this one. So I'm like the youngest Gen Xer, the oldest Gen Yer. And it's an interesting one. So there's the younger Gen Y and the older Gen Y. And you're expected to have at least the education level as your previous generation, at least as much education as a Gen Xer. And the things that people believe make this generation unique is how much we use technology, music and pop culture, our tolerance level of what we're willing to accept, whether it be ethnicity or lifestyle, our intelligence, and our clothes. And I think that one of the things that I would say being on the threshold of these two that we have to be careful of is realizing that we don't always have the intelligence that we think we do. And I think that there's some experience that creates some intelligence. So just little life advice for you there. I think that what I've learned going from young to old is that there is a lot of intelligence, and I would actually call it wisdom, that comes with age and experience. And so sometimes it's not what we learned or read, it's how we did something and what we got from it. Moving on to Generation Z, these are the digital natives. This group here, they have a lot of purchasing power at this point, yet not as much as everybody else. And Gen Z gets bored easily. I mean, we talk about this all the time. I think as we try to market to Gen Z at my current company, we're always talking about how do we make it quick, fast. I mean, we've taken videos from 15 minutes to 5 minutes to 10 seconds. You know, it's like, how do we get someone just engaged for 10 seconds? So it's an interesting dynamic, but we need to realize that as this group has been forming purchase patterns in their lives, this is what's going to follow them throughout life. So you might actually be in a Gen Z. Let's see, you'd have to be, yeah, you could probably be in a Gen Z. In fact, most of you probably are. I'm sorry, I said Gen Y. So most of the people in college, this is your group, and yeah, it's an interesting group to have in. And I think this is the millennial generation. People kind of rip on it a little bit. I don't think that's appropriate, and I think that's actually one of those stereotypes. Instead of understanding the millennial group, it's the stereotypes of the millennial group. So as we look at social stratification, one second here, as we're looking at that, there's just some aspects to it. We're going to kind of go over these as we walk through this, but we're going to pivot from age to class, I think is the right word. And it's like, where do we fit economically into all this? So we're familiar with the concept of social class, like where we fit with money, but most of us would have difficulty explaining our class system to a foreigner from a different country. Remember, we're talking about America. So social rank is one of the positions relative to others on one or more dimensions valued by society. So we could say that's our social standing. I would say that when we talk about a class system, we'd say we have lower, upper, and middle, or middle and upper class, right? And in America, though, that's really weird because there's not a pure class. There's people that move and fluctuate between those classes quite often. And I would say that's probably one of the more unique pieces of America, is that people can move class structures, whereas in other countries, that's actually a lot harder than it is in America to fluctuate. And you can go up and down in America. So that's an interesting piece of this. So we could look at parental status, education, occupation, income that set limits. If I was to tell you that a college graduate is more likely to make over $100,000 than less likely, would you believe me or not believe me? So I think in America, what we do is we kind of figure out what are the boxes I need to check as a society to ensure that I'm in a different group of social status, of social stratification. And like I would say, even back in the throes of the recent recession that we had probably 8 years ago, unemployment for PhDs was never above, I think it was 2%. So whereas unemployment had gone up to 8% for someone with no college education, a bachelor's degree was down to like 6%, a master's degree was down to like 3%, and a PhD was at like 2%. I think those are the correct stats. So it's interesting because just by putting ourselves in a group, we can actually help ensure that we don't move as far down in a social stratification concept there. So status crystallization, as they call it, which is you're locked into the group that you were born into, is a lot less in the US than in a lot of other countries around the world. So social standing is derived and influences behavior. And when we talk about that, it's like, okay, what are the occupation, education, ownership, income, and heritage? If I was to tell you that I worked in a coal mine, no offense to coal miners. If I didn't graduate college or high school, no offense to people that didn't do that. If I rented and if I had less than $25,000 a year and my parents did the same thing, where would I go into the social standing? So those little pieces right there can affect where we move into our social standing. And the social standing is like, okay, upper class, middle class, working class, or lower class. That they have 4 in here. And then we have our, unique behaviors. So are you going to buy a Lamborghini? Well, which class are you going to be in? Is the lower class going to be buying a Lamborghini? That's probably not going to happen. We're probably thinking upper class, maybe somebody who saved a lot in the middle class would do that. So we can see that there's different behaviors that these groups have. Now, the Coleman Rainwater social class hierarchy, they have described it, and this is on page 130 in the text, they say, okay, look, we have, in the upper Americans, we have three groups. It's the upper. This is the capital S society. They inherited wealth. They're aristocratic. They're the Gettys, the Rothschilds. This is a lot of really big groups, or the Kennedys, I would probably say. These families are upper. They just have inherited a lot of it by the sheer nature of being in that family. You're wealthy. Then we have the lower upper. And this is the group of people that are the social elite. They're drawn from the current professional corporate leadership. So these might be CEOs, some corporate board leaders. They have a lot of money. They're a lot wealthier than a lot of us will ever be, most likely. And they can do things that a lot of us can't. And so that, the upper is 0.3% of the population. The lower upper is 1.2% of the population. The upper middle, these are college graduate managers and professionals, lifestyle centers on careers, private clubs, causes in the arts. I love to go to Broadway. I don't know if I'd consider myself an artistic person who wants to, bathe myself in the opulence of the Met Gala and stuff like that. So that's 12.5% of the groups. Then we have middle Americans. So we have middle class, which is the average pay white collar workers and their blue collar friends. They live on the better side of town and they try to do the proper things. This is a big chunk of people right here. And then we have the working class, which is another big chunk, which is average blue collar workers lead working class lifestyles, whatever the income, school background, and job. So this is just a working group of people. And then we have the upper lower, which is a lower group of people, but not the lowest. They're working, they're not on welfare, and their living standards just above poverty. Then we have the bottom group, which is pretty much, they're on welfare. They're poverty stricken, 7% of the population. They're usually out of work. They have the dirtiest jobs. They're always getting fired. They're struggling. And just as an interesting side note, in America, like right in the middle of middle Americans, that middle class, the 32%, from that point up are typically the people paying taxes. And then from the working class down, they're receiving benefit. So it doesn't mean that they aren't paying taxes, but they usually get all their taxes back from the federal government. So that's kind of like a little way to differentiate these two groups also. And okay, so let's go ahead and jump into, this is kind of a basic profile, I would say a typical profile of what these groups would look like. And you can see okay, what's their income level, their education, their occupation. These are things to, I guess, say, okay, if I want to be in the upper Americans group, I probably, if I'm just looking at this and I'm making a really broad generalization, but I probably want to have at least a master's degree because that's going to get me in there. And then I probably want to get a medical degree, one of those two, right? So I'm going to want to do one of those two things in order to get myself up out of that social class. So the middle class aspires to belong to the upper middle class, so they want to get the products consumed by the upper middle class. And so positioning is we want to make our products upper class symbolism for middle class products. And then you're going to repeat and rewind. So we want to pull people up through this, and we do that in a couple ways. I've got a good example here in a couple slides. There are two basic approaches to measuring our social status. The first one is a single item index and then a multi-item index. And so when we look at a single, I want to just jump into this really quick. That is, okay, is it just based on education? Is it based on occupation? Or is it based on income? So if we were just say, if you make over 100,000 or under 100,000, we're going to put you in two different groups. If you make over 250,000 or under 250,000, you're going to be in two different groups. Now, there's a lot of people that probably separate when we go 250 and above and 250 and below. There's a lot of difference in that group of people. And so we might want to say, here, I'll give you a real world example. This isn't based on income, but we were talking about purchases. And we were just trying to find the other day here, okay, somebody that spends $25 or $50 a month or $100 a month or $200 a month, what are those groups and what do they look like? And so we're building out personas for that. And we're trying to see, okay, what is the typical thing that's happening with those people with our company? And then we get to say, okay, what does their economic outlook look like? How much money are they making? What are they, what's their occupation? What gender are they? We start going through all this stuff so we can start understanding that group, and then seeing if there's some way we can attract them to the next rung up. That's just something that we do. And so when we look at a multi-item index, which I like, and that's on page 137, this index of social position by the Hollingshead group, you can go through, and if you're looking at this on 137, it gives you occupation. And so if you go through, it says higher executives of large concerns, proprietors, and major professionals. They would get a score of 1, all the way down to unskilled employees. Now, if I was looking at this, I'll just be transparent. I don't know if I'm a major professional. I wish I was. But I think I'm more of a business manager, proprietor of medium-sized business or lesser professionals. So I would give myself a score of a 2 on that one. And then you multiply it by 7, so that makes it 14. And then on the education score, it says professional, which is, well, I have a PhD, so it's that level, all the way down to less than 7 years of school, which is 7. I get a 1 on that one. So if I just take those two things, and I have to multiply that one by 4, so I'm at a score of 18. If I go down below, upper class is 11 to 17, and upper middle is 18 to 31. So I'd be in the upper middle class according to this index. Okay, and these are just things that give us a little way to measure and get a little more concrete on things, so that we can, like I said at the beginning of this, maybe I could go out and do some qualitative interviews and then validate it with some survey data. So that'd be a good way to do it, and I like that. So, we've been talking about this a lot today, but like, how do we measure it? And do we use demographics or social status? So which one, chicken before the egg kind of thing, which one means I got here because of X? And so the social status is largely derived from demographics, because that's one's income, education, occupation. They go a long way to determining one's social class or status. So should we use the overall social status or a demographic variable such as income? And according to this book, unless the marketer is interested in social status per se, he or she will most likely focus on the demographic characteristics as direct influencers on the consumer's behavior. So we can look at those things. Now, we're going to contradict that just a little bit on this next slide, but I just want to say that if we were to be using social stratification marketing, we probably would target a group of people that we would say, okay, Levi's has a thing, Levi's by opening ceremony. This is upper middle class product position. It's premium price, $200 to $300 range of jeans. They're trendy, they're elite. They're probably going to go have, rich people that people would aspire to be, a little bit more upper middle class, wear them. They're going to sell them in the stores that they shop in. It's probably more like a Nordstrom's versus a 501 original, which costs $40 to $60. They probably want people to feel like, oh, but I have real Levi's right here, quality Levi's. They're probably focused on men, and they're going to be sold instead of at Nordstrom's at like Macy's or Kohl's. And then we get Signature by Levi's, which is the working class product position. Cheaper, they're about $20 price range. They're value image, not trendy or authentic. And the focus on families who need or want value, and they're probably going to be sold at some place like Walmart. So you can see that we have those 3 different groups, and if you go into a Nordstrom's, you're like, oh, maybe I want to buy the Levi's at Nordstrom's instead of buying the Levi's at Macy's. And that's the case. Now, it's really funny because I'm kind of snooty about a lot of stuff. I can't stand to shop at Nordstrom's. I think it's crazy when you're buying a shirt for $120, but that doesn't float my boat. I have a friend who spends thousands and thousands of dollars on watches. I've never understood it. I don't get it. Give me an Apple Watch. I'm happy. It doesn't need to be the ceramic one. I'd love to, actually probably would love to have the ceramic one, but I can't bring myself to spend that much money on a watch. So everybody's different. And that's the cool part about this. So what we need to take away from this is that we're going to use these 2 tools in our toolbox to be able to find better ways to market to people. I hope this has been helpful, and I will talk to you in the next video. Thanks.